What's up guys, Asian here with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade. The Stamina Nightblade is a very powerful Stamina DPS class, but it is one of the most difficult classes to master in the game, but it does have the potential to pull some really high DPS. In fact, it has the potential to outparse even the Stamina DK in the correct hands, especially after the buff to Relentless focus in Dragon Bones, so do keep that in mind. That Stamina Nightblades, while they are very strong, do have a very steep learning curve. So if you are going to make a Stamina Nightblade, do take that into consideration that you will need to practice your rotation probably a lot more than the Stamina Dragon Knight. So just like our other build videos, we're going to be going over gear, CP point distributions, skill bars, your attributes, mundus, race, everything like that. We'll talk about a rotation, kind of what you should be looking at, what you should be prioritizing. Then we'll top things off with a 6 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the kind of DPS that a Stamina Nightblade can pull, as well as the overall what the rotation will look like. So let's go ahead and get started here with gear. We are going with a 2-piece Velidreth here. I do have a heavy piece here, so I am going 6 medium, 1 heavy, and that's just to give myself a little bit more health to improve my survivability. I prefer giving myself a little bit more survivability than the minuscule, the small boost in DPS, just because a dead DPS is no DPS, so it's better to stay alive than it is to maximize your DPS output. For our first of our 5-piece sets, we are going with Nightmother's Gaze. Nightmother's Gaze is very good on a Nightblade in terms of a debuff set because it procs off of critical damage, and Nightblades generally have higher crit chance than the other stamina classes. So Nightmother's Gaze is typically what you would be asked to wear as a stamina Nightblade if you are wearing a debuff set. You have some other options for debuff sets though. Instead of Nightmother's Gaze, you could be asked to wear Morag Tong, you could be asked to use Sunderflame or War Machine. All three of those are buff or debuff sets that provide some level of group utility. Morag Tong is only really good for groups that have 2 or more stam DKs, just for the way the poison damage buff works out. Sunderflame is a larger debuff than Nightmother's Gaze, but it does require you to use a heavy attack, so it's not very well suited for Stamina Nightblades because Stamina Nightblades generally do more light attacks and heavy attacks in their rotation. And War Machine, if you're going with War Machine, you probably won't be necessarily replacing Nightmother's Gaze with it, although you can if you so choose. War Machine basically gives you and your closest 2 allies Major Slayer, which helps boost your damage against trials and dungeon bosses. So War Machine, because the Nightblades primary ultimate is going to be Incapacitating Strike, which costs only 70 ultimate. War Machine works very well on a Nightblade. For our second 5-piece, we're going with Vicious Ophidian. Vicious Ophidian, we're mainly using this here for the stamina reduction cost. It reduces our stamina cost by 8%. We're going to go with Jewels and 2 armor pieces just because it's very easy, or relatively easy I should say, to get gold Vicious Ophidian jewelry. So that will give us the best effect for our 2, 4, and 5-piece effects. For our jewelry, again, I'm using Vicious Ophidian. I'm on the PTS, so I don't have access to gold jewelry. We have 3 weapon damage glyphs here. You could potentially replace one of these with the Regen glyph, but you will see a pretty noticeable loss in DPS if you decide to do so. But because Stamina Nightblades use a lot more light attacks than other stamina builds, and we are using a heavy attack build, the Regen glyph might not be a bad idea. But again, that's kind of up to you. You will end up seeing a overall DPS loss if you decide to go that route. For our front bar, we're going with 2 Daggers of Nightmother. Originally, you can go with Vicious Ophidian if you'd like, but because, again, of the light attack rotation that we're doing with the Stamina Nightblade, you want to try to keep Vicious Ophidian up while you're on your back bar to conserve stamina. So that's why we're going with Nightmother's Gaze daggers here. So that's kind of the same thing regardless of the debuff set that you're using. You want to maintain your 5-piece Vicious Ophidian and then just use weapons for the second 5-piece set that you are using. We're going with 2 daggers here because Nightblades do get additional crit damage from one of their passives, so we want that additional crit chance to help boost our damage overall, but you can go with an axe dagger if you so choose. What's important is you maintain your traits and your enchants. So for your main hand, you're going to go with nirn with a poison damage enchant, and for your offhand, you're going to go with infused with a weapon damage enchant. And then for our back bar, we're going with the Maelstrom Bow nirn with a Double Ravage Health poison. Now going over our kind of attributes, race, things like that, Mundus. I am a Bosmer, I'm a Wood Elf here. Wood Elves get 21% additional stamina regen, but they get lower max stam compared to other stamina races, so we only get 6% max stam. Other races that you might want to use, Red Guards are going to be the strongest in terms of DPS. They get the most amount of max stamina, they only get a little bit, stamina regen, I believe it's 9%. Then they get Adrenaline Rush, which basically gives them back stamina every 5 seconds when they deal melee damage, so that's really helpful for sustain. So Red Guards are going to be the strongest race when it comes to stamina DPS. Khajiits are also a very strong choice as well. They get some pretty nice stamina regen. They don't get as much max stamina as Red Guards, I believe it's still 6%, but they get 8% additional crit, which synergizes pretty well with our 10% additional crit damage. If you have access to the Imperial Edition, then Imperials are also not a bad choice. They get a nice hefty boost to health and stamina, which helps improve your survivability, so you don't have to worry about going with a heavy piece or putting points into health as an Imperial. But again, that is gated behind the Imperial upgrade, so if you don't have Imperials, don't feel like you need to use them. So for our attributes, I had 64 points into stamina, but you can put a couple points into health if you find yourself lacking in survivability a little bit. I wouldn't put too many points into health, 4 or 5 max, because you don't want to give up too much when it comes to DPS. For our Mundus, we are going with the Warrior. You can go with the Lover instead. Kind of depends on the amount of debuffs that you have in group, as well as what kind of content you're running specifically. So for like 4-man content, the Lover might end up being better than the Warrior. Generally speaking, if using the Lover puts you over the penetration cap of 18,200, then a Warrior will outparse the Lover. So with all your debuff sets, so your debuff sets for stamina are going to be Night Mother's Gaze, Sunderflame, Torog's Crusher, or non-Torog's Crusher, depends on what you're using, and Alkosh. And then you also have to consider Power of the Light from the Stamplar for that minor fracture boost. If you have all those debuffs up, Warrior is definitely going to win out over the Lover. You will be over-penetrating with the Lover. However, if you're missing 2, 3 of those debuffs, then the Lover might end up outparsing the Warrior. Again, it all depends on whether you are over the penetration cap when you use the Lover. So kind of figure that out for your own raid group and pick between the Warrior and the Lover. You can also use the Thief if you would like. It's not quite as strong as the Warrior or the Lover, but it is still a potential Mundustone option there. Then we have max health, max stamina food, so that's just plain blue food. And now we're going to go over our skills. For our front bar, we have Killer's Blade. This is going to be our Execute. Surprise Attack, Deadly Cloak, Relentless Focus, Blood Craze. You can go with Rending Slashes instead if you would like. I like Blood Craze for additional heal over time. Blood Rending Slashes is the stronger morph when it comes to pure DPS. And then Flawless Dawnbreaker on our front bar for that weapon damage boost. For our back bar, we have Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, staples to all stamina DPS classes. Leeching Strikes for helpful sustain as well as some additional healing. Rearming Trap and Incapacitating Strike. This is going to be our primary ultimate that we use. Now for our champion point distributions. The CP cap is now 720, which gives us 240 points across each of the 3 different nodes. So for green CPs, we have 75 into Mooncalf, 75 into Tenacity. That leaves us with 90 points, which you can distribute across the remaining nodes, however you would like. I personally have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 28 Warlord, but again, you can redistribute those however you'd like to fit your playstyle. Now for blue CPs, the distribution that I have is a one-size-fits-most scenario, so depending on your specific raid group, you might need to redistribute accordingly. So mine is fit for my raid group, so I have only get infused Torog's Crusher. We don't have Alkosh, so I have a couple of points to piercing here. I highly recommend you pick up constellations and combat metrics in order to figure out your optimal CP point distribution for your blue CPs. Basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do a parse, preferably an in-raid parse with something like Valarial or the Stone Atronach in Vet Ethereal Archive. Basically tank and spank boss if you can. Otherwise, you can go with something like a 6-mil dummy as long as you're getting some level of raid buffs there. You're going to save that report. You hit Combat Metrics Import when you bring it up, and it'll import all the relevant information. You will need to manually input your penetration value here. Swap over to this tab here, Champion Points. Then you're just going to want to hit Calculate, and under this column here, it will tell you your optimal CP point distribution given the parse that you have. So this is the one that I've been given. 64 into Mighty, 24 into Piercing, 56 into Precise Strikes, 52 into Thaumaturge, and 44 into Master at Arms. Now for our red CPs, I like to go with the one-size-fits-most distribution, but depending on the content you're running, you might want to redistribute accordingly. For example, if you're going to be running V-Maul, you're going to be taking more magic damage than physical damage, so you might want to take points out of Hardy and put them into Elemental Defender. That's kind of up to you to play around with. I have 56 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick Skin, 64 into Hardy, and Elemental Defender. Now, you can put 10 points into Quick Recovery if you'd like for the Field Physician passive, which reduces the amount of damage you take while you're resurrecting another player. It is nice to have, just in case you are going to end up rezzing somebody. You could potentially go up to 30 for the Infusion passive, but it's not quite as strong on Stamina DPS than on Magicka DPS, so I would probably just stick with 10 points into Quick Recovery for that Field Physician passive. So with all that done, let's go ahead and talk about our rotation here. We'll head over to this 2 million dummies so you guys can get an idea of what we're going to be going for. So obviously before a parse you want to buff up with your potions. You know, use Relentless and Siphoning, so you get all those buffs up, and then you're going to start off with your backbar dots. So your backbar dots are going to be very powerful and very good contributors to your DPS, so Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Razor, Caltrops. You're going to want to make sure to keep those up as much as you can, and then because Incap is a very cheap ultimate, you're going to want to use it after you finish your backbar rotation. So here's what it's going to look like. I like to start things off with Rearming Trap. You have Incap here, and use your bow proc as soon as you can. I like to get in at least one heavy attack in my front bar rotation to help out my sustain. We would Incap here, and that's pretty much it. So Nightblades kind of have a dynamic rotation in that you don't really know where you're going to end up putting your heavy attack. Again, I like to use at least one heavy attack just to help sustain myself. And that's pretty much it for the rotation. I just decided to kill a dummy just to let it reset. So the important thing to keep up is going to be your two Nightblade buffs, so Relentless and Siphoning. That's just to help out your sustain as well as for the bow procs. So some people will actually bar swap onto their front bar to get the bow proc off. If you want to do that, go ahead, but then you're going to end up with a very dynamic rotation, and so I don't recommend doing that. If you can, I like to stick with a more static rotation. So basically just whenever I'm on my front bar, I use my bow proc. With the changes to Relentless Focus and Merciless Resolve from Dragon Bones, it will actually keep your stack even after the buff runs out. So it's not that big of a deal if you don't hit the bow proc right away. But, you know, it's kind of up to you. I've seen very good Nightblades do a very dynamic rotation of the stamina DPS, but the most important thing is to keep your backbar dots running. So that's kind of why I don't recommend prioritizing your bow proc necessarily, and just get your backbar dots off and then swap to your front bar, and if you have the bow proc, use it. So let's go ahead and show you guys what you're able to pull with a 6 mil dummy. There was a little bit of lag there when I was demonstrating that rotation there, so hopefully you won't see that. Lag is can be pretty killer on Nightblade rotation, so it's Magicka and Stamina, because you will be relying pretty heavily on your weaving, so lag obviously kind of complicates that a little bit. So hopefully you won't get that much lag in this parse. We're going to buff up, drink our potion, and away we go. See here, I use Incap now. So I generally like to use a heavy attack before I go into my backbar rotation, but again, you can kind of put that wherever you'd like. And even though I don't have a bow proc, I want to finish my backbar rotation before I swap. in order to do that. You can see here we pretty much re-up Leeching Strike every other rotation when we're on our back bar. So if you do have 5 stacks saved up when you re-up Merciless, it will just automatically proc when you rebuff it. For example, here when I rebuff, it'll turn into the bow proc, so then you just use it. Oh, I missed my deadly cloak there. You generally don't want to let deadly cloak fall because of that damage mitigation boost. So now we are in execute. So different people have different approaches when it comes to execute. I ran out of stamina, damn it. Generally speaking though, what in execute you're generally going to want to only use Endless Hail and Poison Injection as your back bar dots. You can pretty much let everything else drop off. And there we have it. That's our Stamina Nightblade parse. I ended up running out of stamina at the end there. I wasn't really paying attention to my stamina reserves. Generally, I want to go into execute with a little bit more stamina than what I had, so you don't have to heavy attack on your bow bar in order to get stamina back. But like I was saying, in execute phase, generally speaking, there's kind of you let a couple of your dots drop off. Some people like to maintain all of your dots on the back bar. I think it's a little bit too much because you're not getting as many Killer's Blades in, and Killer's Blade will do more damage than your dots will, during execute at least. So I just like to keep up Endless Hail and Poison Injection, because Poison Injection does deal more damage in execute phase, as well as obviously Leeching. If you can, you could try to keep up Rearming Trap as well. The Minor Force does help. You don't have to though. You're also going to want to try to keep up Deadly Cloak and Relentless. Don't use any bow procs during execute though, because I'll show you guys on comment metrics. So Killer's Blade here, we can see procs for about average 36k, which is a little bit less than our Assassin's Scourge. Assassin's Scourge does crit for higher, but it does take more time. The animation takes more time than Killer's Blade, so just stick with Killer's Blade. Don't necessarily use your bow procs during execute phase, because it will usually end up being about equal in terms of DPS, but Killer's Blade generally will hit more consistently, a little bit higher, and it's a little bit faster to use. So you can see here, Endless Hail, Razor, Caltrops, Poison Injection. Your back bar dots are pretty strong, and obviously our light attacks, because we're doing light attack rotation, deal more damage than our heavy attack, which are all the way down here. So 40.2k on a 6 million dummy parse. That is with you know, my kind of mess up at the end there, running out of stamina. You can see here that regen per drain per second, it's pretty close. You're obviously going to have a little bit lower regen versus drain, and that's just kind of to be expected because we aren't running a heavy attack rotation, because we do want to get more bow procs off where and when we can. So that's it for this build video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.